This war ended more than 8 decades ago and lasted only a little more than 3 months, but for some reason it is still compared to Russia's war against Ukraine. Some include this war in World War II, while others, primarily Russian historians, consider them separately. In this issue of we will talk about the Winter War between the Soviet Union and Finland. We will find out how the Finns managed to preserve their state, what role the army played in this, and what role politicians played. Receive us, the beauty of Suomi, in a necklace of transparent lakes. With this song, the Red Army crossed the Finnish border on November 30, 1939. The beauty would not tolerate this. She met the Soviet armored vehicles with a Molotov cocktail, accompanied by a song about the Red Army. Molotov promised that tomorrow they would be eating ice cream in Helsinki. But no, Molotov. But let's go back a couple of months. Realizing the possibility of war with Germany, the USSR demanded to strengthen the security of Leningrad, the second most important Soviet city. At that time, the border was only 30 kilometers from it. So the USSR leadership offered Finland a territory exchange. They said, you move the border away from Leningrad, and in return, we will give you twice as much territory in Karelia. Since Leningrad cannot be moved, the border will have to be moved further away from it. The USSR also demanded the dismantling of the fortifications that had been built on the Finnish-Soviet border, the Mannerheim Line. The Finns categorically refused to give up their national heritage. While the USSR did not hesitate, it demanded the placement of its military bases on Finnish territory, primarily on the land islands in the Baltic Sea. This would mean for Helsinki a rejection of neutrality, with the prospect of being drawn into a major war that had already begun. Thus, the negotiations in early November ended in vain. Then the main Soviet newspaper Pravda wrote, "We will throw to hell any game of political gamblers and go our own way. No matter what, we guarantee the security of the USSR." On November 26th, the Soviet government sent an official note to the Finnish government stating that 4 Red Army soldiers had been killed and 9 wounded near the border village of Mainila on the Karelian Isthmus as a result of artillery shelling of the USSR. The Finns replied that, according to their information, the shelling had been carried out from Soviet territory, and proposed creating a commission to investigate. But the USSR broke off diplomatic relations with Finland and turned on the most threatening rhetoric. The Finnish soldiers have probably forgotten that the Soviet people will be able to destroy and crush them like insects. The Red Army, which completely outnumbered the enemy, began military operations. From the very beginning, Moscow had 425,000 soldiers against 265,000 for the Finns. A significant portion of the latter were members of the paramilitary organization Shaka. By the end of the war, the USSR had increased the number of troops on the Finnish front to 900,000. But the Shakas were also motivated fighters. They shot well and skied well. The average Red Army soldier could not boast of any of this. Motivated people are generally capable of victories that amaze the world. The USSR tried to use the experience of the so-called Polish campaign in the fall of 1939. Then, the Soviet Union entered Poland during its occupation by the Germans on September 17th and declared that the state had ceased to exist because the Polish government had left the country. And therefore, Moscow cannot stand aside from the fate of Ukrainians and Belarusians living in Poland. True, the Polish government left the territory of the state in the evening after this statement, but the Union still managed not to formally appear as an aggressor. The USSR planned to act against Finland in a similar scenario. In response to the League of Nations proposals to resolve the conflict, Moscow replied, "The Soviet Union is not in a state of war with Finland and does not threaten the Finnish people with war. The Soviet Union is in peaceful relations with the Democratic Republic of Finland, with whose government a treaty of mutual assistance and friendship was concluded on December 2nd of this year." It was further stated that the Kremlin had agreed to help the Finnish democratic government eliminate a dangerous hotbed of war. The creation of a puppet government was announced 3 days earlier in the newly captured Finnish border town of Terioki. The structure was headed by Otto Kuusinen, a Finnish communist and a long-time supporter of the Bolsheviks. In 1918, he fled to the Soviet Union, where he made a successful career in the Comintern and the apparatus of the Communist Party Central Committee. Hoping for the support of the Finns for this artificial government, Stalin even promised to give the country part of Karelia in exchange for territories near Leningrad, but Helsinki did not agree to this. Later, the Finnish commander-in-chief, Karl Mannerheim, assessed national unity as one of the most important factors thanks to which Finland had survived. Later, the Finnish commander-in-chief Karl Mannerheim assessed national unity as one of the most important factors that enabled Finland to survive. Even earlier, Moscow had begun to form the so-called Finnish People's Army, which was manned by Finns and Karelians who served in units of the Leningrad military district. By the end of the war, this army numbered about 25,000 soldiers, but they hardly took part in the fighting. They were kept so that they could parade through the Finnish capital. They even had special uniforms made for them, using captured Polish uniforms. But Moscow's plan did not work. The real Finnish government remained in the country and was not going to flee. The League of Nations condemned the USSR and expelled it from the organization as an aggressor state. An embargo was imposed on trade with the Soviet Union, and the Finns received a large amount of international aid, humanitarian and military. France and Great Britain were even preparing to send an expeditionary corps to Finland. In total, about 12,000 volunteers arrived in Finland from more than 24 countries during the war. However, most of them had no military training, so they underwent training, and not all of them managed to fight. The largest number of volunteers came from Sweden, almost 9,000, as well as from Norway, Denmark, and Hungary. The Third Reich, which wanted to drag out this war, acted cunningly. Germany did not provide Finland with any assistance, did not even allow Italian military aircraft to fly over its territory and detain the transit of weapons, but at the same time secretly compensated Sweden for the cost of military supplies sent to the Finns. This is a complex political game that is not easy to understand, but we are carefully selecting the facts to explain the essence of the events. Therefore, to facilitate the dissemination of reliable information, we urge you to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you have not done so yet. According to the initial plan, the Soviet command intended to defeat Finland within 10-15 days.